start in just 2 minutes, so just start getting comfortable. Good evening, Space Park community. Thank you all for coming here. I want to just start off by thanking the people that made this happen. Sam Baum, David Sinopoli, Lucas, the whole Space Park team. So round of applause for those individuals. And before we introduce the panelists, I want to get to know the audience a little bit. So I just got a couple questions for you guys. So my first question is, who here cares about mental health? Round of applause. Second question is, who here believes that psychedelic medicines can be transformational and improve mental health? And that's why we're with this crowd. That's why we're here engaging with the Space Park community. We're really here to raise awareness and break down stigma around psychedelic medicines and mental health. My background is I'm an attorney and a CPA. And I've dedicated my personal and business life to this mental health journey. I wear 3 hats in the psychedelic industry. My first hat is my investor hat. I run a venture capital fund, Eater Investments, that deploys capital into early stage psychedelic companies. My second hat is my advocacy hat through my nonprofit, Mr. Psychedelic Law. We're currently working very hard on legal reform here in Florida. Some of you may not know, we actually filed a bill, a 50-page bill in the last legislative session to legalize psilocybin, and we actually filed a new bill in this past legislative session. So if any of you guys are interested in getting involved on the advocacy side, MrPsychedelicLaw.com is the website. Just click get involved and drop your email and information there and you get involved. My third hat is my law firm that represents various psychedelic companies in the industry, including a couple of Zappies companies, and I work with Dr. Michelle Weiner and Dr. Julia Mir over here as well. So very active in the psychedelic industry. A lot of people don't realize that this industry is really evolving very, very quickly. And joining me tonight are 3 absolute leaders in the industry and dear friends of mine. So without further ado, I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves.
Okay, my name is Michelle Weiner. I'm a pain management doctor. I am partners in a private practice, and I basically use cannabis and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to treat chronic pain that's physical and emotional pain. So I've done some research using cannabis as a substitute for opioids. I've done a study looking at high versus low dose of ketamine for chronic pain and depression. And I really just want to help people decrease pharmaceuticals and improve their quality of life, and do it through evidence-based research.
I'm Zappy, and I want to look through the lens for me as an activist, and I'm here to encourage everybody to become a little bit more radical right now, because with the state of the world where it is, we need something that's going to break through, and this is it. And so we, as the psychonauts ourselves, have to really be the people that educate the medical community and educate the system about what's really going on. I'm representing today the Mind Army, which is a nonprofit that's fighting for the right to pursue happiness. And Dustin Robinson and a very powerful group of attorneys, we've come together to basically ask for the DEA to look at the most recent research that's come out, and to ask for regular rescheduling to take place, because it hasn't happened in 55 years, and we're not just going to sit here now in this mental health crisis and let somebody say that alcohol is good, tobacco is good, but somehow psilocybin mushrooms aren't good and you can't use them, they're off limits, even if you're in crisis. We just don't accept that. So I invite everybody to join the Mind Army.
I am Dr. Julia Mirror. I'm a recovering physician. About 4 years ago, I realized that the Western model is not something that I can get behind. So I walked away, and I realized that there's an emerging industry here, and I positioned myself to be able to see the different perspectives of what's happening. So I'm involved with some work with policy here in Florida with Dustin, and on a national level as well. I'm an advisor for the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, which is lobbying the NIH for $100 million to study psychedelics. I'm also involved in clinical research. So there's an FDA phase 2 trial that just completed using psilocybin for major depression. I was one of the doctors that sat with these patients for the last year. That was very cool. And the most recent actually two recent things. I'm the director of strategy for a network of ketamine clinics up in New York, hopefully in the future in Florida. And then I started also advising another psychedelic fund, because that kind of rounds out the 4 pillars that will bring us forward: policy, clinics, research, and funding.
We got so much love for all these people. Can we get one more round of applause for the panelists? I want the speaker to applaud. So really, I want to be clear what we're here to talk about today. It's really not about what some people might think psychedelics are, partying and getting crazy. What we're really here to talk about is, Zappy kind of references, the global mental health crisis. Right now, over 1 billion people are suffering from some sort of mental or behavioral health indication. The numbers are absolutely staggering. And like I mentioned in my introduction, we're here to break down stigma, to raise awareness. So the best way to do that is really through stories. So before I jump into the great work that our panelists are doing, I'm gonna ask each of them to share their story around their psychedelic journey and what led them to work in this industry.
Okay, well, so as a physician, I think that if I am actually doing ketamine treatments for patients, it's actually important for me to try it myself, which is unlike any other form of medicine. So I did a group ketamine session with Zappy actually a few years ago, and it was unbelievable. It was like a bunch of people, and it was a very relaxed setting. There was a physician there. It was an oral lozenge that we were able to do. And my session was all about love being the medicine, and that was really the message that I got. It was just a very new feeling for me, and also I was at a place in my life where I was very stuck, and I didn't think that there was another option. And so it really taught me, just to always have love for myself and then for others, and then to deliver the medicine with love. And then I will say that last weekend was Miami Beach Pride, and I've been openly gay for 20 years, but I took a gram of psilocybin, and I had like the most liberating, unbelievable weekend of my life. It was just like this way of connecting with myself in a different way than I've ever done before. So many people there, and even though that may appear recreational, I was very sure about the dose I was taking. I was with other people, so I felt very safe, and it just really kind of opened me up to being able to connect with myself and others in a way not to judge other people and to not feel judged by others. So that's my experience.
I had an experience when I was younger where that changed my life, where I saw my hand during a psychedelic experience, and it was just like trillions of atoms, but they were vibrating at a certain frequency. And I looked over at my friend, and he was the same exact atoms, but just a slightly different frequency. And the table, same but different. And I just could never unsee that in my life. It just changed everything for me, that I was using my 5 senses just to mute down everything so I could handle having a conversation and that kind of thing. And so when I had a kind of spiritual midlife crisis in 2010 or so, I had done everything society told me to do to be happy. I did it all, go to college, make money, get a job, have a family, and you'll be totally fulfilled. And when I did it, I wasn't totally fulfilled. And I thought to myself, maybe if I could use some of this shamanic medicine, go to the jungle and look inside, maybe I could get some of these answers and figure out what I'm doing. So I made that kind of my mission, and I made a movie called The Reality of Truth with Michelle Rodriguez, where we go to the jungle and do some plant medicine. So it's really affected my life. When I came back from that, I was just like, I have to, just educate people, because that's what's missing right now. We have the solution.
So I was always told as a kid that if you do mushrooms, you're gonna think that you became like a thing of orange juice and you're gonna go crazy, or I'm sure some of you have heard all of these tales. And then I was in my residency. I've reached my dream of becoming a doctor almost. I was like kind of in it already, and something wasn't right. I was burning out, I was miserable, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna start therapy, I'm gonna do all these things. And I did, and then at one point my therapist was like, you know what, I think we need to increase your meds, I think we need to do things. And I said, hold on, I think that there's something else for me to do. So that was, and that was the point that I decided to resign. What had happened a few months before that was I was on vacation, I was handed mushrooms, and I was told, I think you need this. So for me, that first experience, it didn't feel like anything so profound. I didn't realize that it was so profound until I went back to my existing reality and realized that all those little things that kind of started to feel not right were so loud, and I wasn't able to ignore it anymore. I wasn't able to ignore the fact that I wasn't buying what I was selling. I wasn't able to ignore the fact that we are toxic to each other. And so while my dose was 3 months prior, the real kind of transformation happened at that moment when, thanks to the dose that made me ask questions, not just how are my choices affecting others, but how are they affecting me? The ability to ask that question was the way that the mushrooms actually helped me change my life. So that was that.
Well, thank you for sharing your stories. And all three of these individuals are in some way operating in the ketamine industry. And some of you might be surprised that there's currently psychedelic assisted therapy occurring absolutely legally. We're not talking about cannabis where it's still federally illegal. All of them are operating businesses doing psychedelic assisted therapy that's legal from a state and federal perspective. And the reason that is that ketamine is a Schedule III substance. So it's been FDA approved as an anesthetic, and it's being used off-label for various mental and behavioral health indications. Off-label use is totally normal. Over 20% of pharmaceuticals are used off-label, which just means they're being used for an indication other than what it was approved for. So I'd like each of you, I know we've all kind of shared somewhat recreational outside the clinic experiences, but Zappy has a business that's actually doing telehealth with ketamine, and Michelle does ketamine in the clinic, and then Julia also works with a company in the Northeast that does that as well. So maybe, Michelle, you could start off kind of what the journey looks like for a patient that's getting ketamine psychedelic assisted therapy in the clinic.
Sure. So ketamine is a medication that can be used in many different ways. And so that's why we really call it personalized medicine. So it's hard to actually say that there's a one-size-fits-all for ketamine, which is why you need a team helping you. Usually you have a physician, you also can have a coach like Janelle, she's my coach in the back, or a therapist. So sometimes the therapeutic alliance is really very important. So usually a patient will come see me in the office, and then we decide which route of administration would be best, whether it's an infusion, an intramuscular injection, or doing ketamine at home, which would be an oral lozenge. I usually have the person work with a coach or a therapist. Sometimes people have done this before and they are kind of stuck in life and they want kind of the next level. They want to alter their consciousness in a safe way. And then we do offer that as well. But usually it's going to be 4 to 6 treatments for someone who has chronic pain, depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And each time we can increase the dose, but the dose is really personalized. So it's based on how the person responds and many other factors and what their goals are. But really the most important thing to me is that there's a team approach and the person feels safe. It's done in my office. We monitor blood pressure and pay attention to other medications that you're taking. And then after each ketamine session, you would follow up with the coach or therapist, set a specific intention, and then move forward in that path.
Zabby, you want to talk about KetaMD and your model?
Sure. So when I came back from Peru and I was telling everybody you got to go sit with a shaman in the jungle, the people that needed it the most were saying, Zappy, I can't do that. My family, they'll Baker Act me, they'll put me in a mental institution if I tell them that right now. I was looking for this Western medicine approach, and I found ketamine back in 2015, and I tried it myself under doctor's supervision, and I was like, wow, this is going to triage Western society. It puts you into this present moment awareness state where all that chatter that's going on fades away immediately, and you can do a lot of work within this 45-minute session. And the science on the ketamine is amazing. Latest is in Nature magazine. They say that you have this area of your brain called the default mode network, and there's a mechanism in there called your lateral habenula. Your lateral habenula is recording all the stress you've ever had in your whole life. When it becomes too much, your brain goes into burst mode, which is a different brain state. And when your brain's in burst mode, it shuts off your dopamine production completely. You're getting no dopamine, which is your happiness, your motivation. The first time you do medical ketamine, it takes the brain out of burst mode, and you immediately start getting the dopamine back. So we joke because KetaMD, we get a lot of calls from the husband or the wife partner the next day, and they're like, oh my God, he just cleaned the garage. He's been claiming he's gonna do that for 5 years. Whatever you're doing, keep going. And I think that's sort of the miracle here, is that this is FDA approved. You go to a doctor's office and you have the experience, so it's approachable by everybody and their family. And this is, a great place to start if you're thinking psychedelics might be able to help you or a family member.
Yeah, and Julia also works with ketamine, but what's very special about Julia is she has the distinct honor of also legally administering psilocybin. Right now, psilocybin is in phase 2 clinical trials. So these are clinical trials. It's for research purposes. It's through USONA, and they're researching psilocybin for major depressive disorder. So Julie, could you kind of give us a little walkthrough, a little background on those clinical trials and what the patient journey looks like for psilocybin? By the way, psilocybin is the main compound, or the psychedelic compound in magic mushrooms, for those of you that don't know.
Sure. So yeah, there's a lot of companies that are studying psilocybin in different conditions, alcohol use disorder, major depression, treatment-resistant disorder, and we were looking at major depression. And the organization, USONA, that was doing the study, they set it up so that we really look at the entire experience as the medicine. Like, it's not, yes, we're just testing the psilocybin molecule, but the container within which it's done is very different than what you see, sometimes even in ketamine clinics, where we actually would sit with the patient for about 5 hours. It's me and my colleague. My colleague is trained in He's a psychiatrist, and he's also trained in these two organizations, MAPS and CIIS, which are focusing on training clinicians to work with psychedelics. So the patient gets 5 hours with us to just tell us their story. And a lot of times, people don't have, you see your therapist for an hour, so you just kind of get a little bit at a time to talk about, but here you get to really remember your life and remember how you got to this place. And that in and of itself has been pretty healing for the people who seem to get the placebo. So this study is designed, you either get the psilocybin or the placebo. It's very difficult to double blind a 3.5 gram dose. Eventually we know what they probably got. And then on the dose day, they come in and they're there for 7 hours. We put on blindfolds, we put on headphones, we have a playlist that's actually available on Spotify, and it just like plays through all this different music. And afterwards, I think the really important thing is the integration. I don't know how many of you know, preparation integration is a huge part of the psychedelic experience. So we would do 2 hours with them the next day, another 2 hours a week later, and then 2 weeks later. And what's been really exciting to see is like the people who seem to get the effective dose, just the way that they start talking about themselves, the way they start thinking about things, like you get to really watch a person shift entirely. And that's been an amazing privilege. And because of the value that we see in this, we're even telling other companies that are saying, no, we just want to do the drug. And it's like, listen, the drug is going to be way more effective if you do it in this kind of container. So that's my experience.
And I'd like to dive a little deeper into that. So there's a lot of excitement around the compound themselves, but there's these extra pharmacological aspects of these compounds that are extremely important when it comes to the efficacy and the safety of the delivery of these compounds. So setting, dosage, extremely important. So even some of my friends who are very active users of psychedelics and big advocates for psychedelics, they were a little surprised when they saw how much I was looking to invest into really research for mental health purposes. And what I explained to them is that the setting and dosage in these therapeutic settings is much different than maybe going to a space concert and taking MDMA or whatever it might be. So I'd like the group to opine on the concept of setting and dosage and the importance of it.
Okay. So I can say that I'm a physician who has a typical clinic or office, and so when I started doing ketamine, everything had to change completely because there couldn't be a lot of noise, because you need to really respect the fact that someone's having this very sacred personal experience. I have recliners in the office, we have music that they play and eye shades, and it's a time for them to really like go inward. And so the setting, being in a clinical setting, is safe for a lot of people. They feel, we're preventing nausea with medication, we're monitoring blood pressure, all those type of things. But at the same time, it's not a typical office. So you don't have like people walking through. It's a time for introspective thought and insight. And so the setting is very important. And then the dose, you can have a psycholytic or a psychedelic dose. What that means is sometimes we'll microdose someone, even with ketamine during therapy. That's really effective for anxiety or OCD. So they'll work with a low dose of ketamine and have more effective talk therapy so that it's not so drawn and long, but more trauma-based and focused. So it can be a low dose, or you can do a high dose where it's a completely, dissociative type of experience where they're out of their body, they feel like they are in heaven. It sometimes can bring on fear, that's why we prepare them properly. And there's a lot of different options, but it really depends the person and what they're going through. And a lot of this is trauma work, so you really do want to talk to someone within a few days after your session so that you can actually discuss the insight gained from your experience and then figure out how to integrate that into your life.
I have a new movie coming out with Lamar Odom, the basketball player Kardashian. It's called Reborn. It's about a psychedelic intervention I gave to him over a couple of year period. And the reason I bring it up is that I think it's really important to work with somebody who understands the medicine, who can figure out for you what your right formula is, because all of these compounds have a different opportunity for you to tap into. So as a psychedelic concierge, when people come to me, rather than me like a concierge at a hotel asking you where you want to go to dinner and what you like, a psychedelic concierge is asking you what traumas you have, what's your intent, and then coming up with a formula for you. So in the movie Lamar Odom Reborn, his formula is ketamine plus plant medicine plus a daily practice like yoga or breathing equals a conscious transformation. And I picked ketamine to start because he'd never gone inside himself. He'd always been told, don't do psychedelics. And so that was an easy place to start. Once he got comfortable, I wound up bringing him down to Mexico to sit with an ibogaine doctor to do ibogaine, which can break a heroin addiction or meth addiction, opiates in one 12-hour session. He had an incredible turnaround, and we did, like I said, breathing and meditation. And so I think the most important thing is to work with somebody who can put you in the right setting rather than, trying to figure it out yourself, because you could potentially do some trauma that way, but otherwise you want to get the most out of it that you can. So if you're with somebody who can just guide you, remind you to breathe or whatever it is, you can really maximize this opportunity right now.
I want to comment a little bit on the daily practice. So we oftentimes talk about the psychedelic experience with the set, your mindset, the intention you're bringing in, the setting. For us in our clinic, it's only for ketamine. And so we have actually built out our main clinic to look just like this. Nature, there's flowers, there's these very elaborate wallpapers, that it's just all meant to not feel like a clinic, to kind of get people out of that mentality of I'm a sick person coming as a patient. So any little intervention we could do, we work on that. But I think it's important to start also discussing, now that we're not talking about just the recreational dose, okay? Make sure you have a good mindset so you're not, freaking out in front of everyone, or in this setting is okay, the music isn't what you hate, the dose is the right dose. But when we're talking about psychedelics for mental health, I think it's also important to discuss like setting, dose, and plan. So that what are you gonna, okay, I wanna feel better. What are you gonna do with that state of feeling better? Because if you're gonna go into your old routine, your old habits, maybe even your own surroundings, you may lose the ability to take that experience with you and really revolutionize your life experience. So I think it's important to just have that in your mind whenever you're doing this for mental health. It's like, what are my goals? What does better look like? And be able to bring that with you once the dose wears off.
And so I want to talk about the research for a minute and what it's showing, because really 3 years ago, that's what really attracted me to the industry. I don't do well with stories or anecdotes. Some people do great with them. I like to see research and data. And it was 3 years ago that Michelle shared with me some of the research going on from Johns Hopkins, Imperial College of London, NYU, Yale. And that's what really started to pique my interest. And since then, our fund has invested tens of millions of dollars into the research to fund psychedelic medicine for various indications. And just to give you an example, right now, MAPS is in phase 3 clinical trials for MDMA for PTSD. So we expect MAPS to have MDMA approved in 2023, and it start to get commercialized by 2024. Now, and our fund has invested in the commercializations of MAPS's MDMA as well. But what I think is really important is to understand what the research is showing. So in their phase 3 readout, the last one that they published, what happened was 2/3 of participants that had PTSD, after going through the MDMA psychedelic assisted therapy, 2/3 of those participants were no longer clinically diagnosed with PTSD. So in the pharmaceutical industry, getting those type of results is absolutely unheard of. Once again, 2/3 of people that had PTSD were no longer clinically diagnosed. That means we could potentially cure 2/3 of these veterans that are suffering with PTSD. Is absolutely incredible. So And it's important to kind of benchmark with what these other SSRIs and benzos are doing. So the SSRIs and benzos like the Xanax, the Zoloft, really it's considered a good result if they're showing 50% efficacy for just reducing symptoms. So 50% of the people for these SSRI and benzos are just getting their symptoms reduced, not actually curing it, just reducing symptoms. So when you compare these results with MDMA, 2/3 of people being cured versus what we have today, 50% of symptoms being decreased, it's absolutely amazing. So we also have psilocybin in phase 2 clinical trials. Julia Amir talked a little bit about that. And so we expect psilocybin to probably be approved and potentially commercialized sometime around 2025 and 2026. So I'd like to ask the panelists to talk a little bit about how they expect the commercialization of these compounds to look like. Right now we kind of have ketamine psychedelic assisted therapy. It's kind of the Wild West. There's really no requirements around that, much different than what's happening right now with MDMA and psilocybin. So go ahead.
You did a great job talking about those studies. So I'll say that ketamine originally, so it's a dissociative anesthetic, so we actually use that in the OR, we use that for kids in the ER all the time. It's a pain medication, but it allows you to dissociate or disconnect mind and body at higher doses. And so the thing with ketamine is that I don't really want to see a lot of strict protocols because it is personalized medicine. So I assume that we have like safety doses, how we normally start and then what our max is, but in general I think that we will see that ketamine right now is being used through insurances in an intranasal route, which is called S-ketamine, but not many providers are actually using that. So I think that we're trying to get insurances to cover ketamine for depression and even chronic pain. In my clinic, what we do is we submit it to insurance, and then whatever we get back, we give it back to the patient so that we can help them in that sense. But I also see that in the future, when MDMA for PTSD or psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression is approved, a patient would have to try and fail multiple options, and we would have to submit that to insurance, and it would be the same process but covered by insurance. You would come into the office, you would have to work with a therapist or a coach, and I also think that the therapists are going to look a little bit different in the sense that they'll be more trauma-based, and it's not going to be like years and years of therapy. That's not the goal here. It's really trying to understand where the story that you have about yourself or these repetitive thoughts come from, break that cycle, and that's really what they do. They disrupt your ordinary mind, which is not helping a lot of people right now. So I think hopefully insurances will cover it. I look forward to ketamine being covered by insurance, but I think that there's a fine line between recreational and more of a clinical setting, and some people don't want to do psychedelics in an office-based setting, but I think that offices will start looking a little bit different.
I just want to tag on to what Dustin said about what's so incredible about the MDMA study that Max did, is that after 2 months after they had done their MDMA, they tested those people and asked them and took a test with them about where they were at, and a significant amount of those people were doing really well. They tested those people a year later and they were even better. So that's like nothing like anything else. And I think we have to just accept that, the medical establishment right now, the traditional medical establishment, don't know about psychedelics. It's our job to educate them. Most doctors I've found don't really even know about nutrition, which could basically handle all of the things that they're pretty much working on, or most. And so we have to be the ones who show them that, and this is what the research is already there. It's already been done. There's tons of it. We have to, as citizens, demand the right. We have to use our power. We have to use celebrity, whatever it takes, to just say, we're in a mental health crisis right now. Here's the research. It's super strong from the most prestigious universities in the world. Let's now let people access these things immediately, because as we've all said, the side effects from traditional medications are out of control, and these psychedelics do not have these kind of side effects. So.
Julie, do you want to add anything else on some of the research and what we're seeing?
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of the facilitators, we all have like a group call and we share our experiences. And time again, we're realizing that when we talk to the patients that come into our studies, which the criteria is you have to have had either like, I think it's 5 lifetime uses of psychedelics, nothing in the last 5 or 10 years. So we're really running out of a patient pool with the popularity increasing. But these are people that have never done drugs, and then the ones that seem to get the effective dose, towards the end of our sessions when we're closing it out, we're like, so what do you think about this? And the same person that said, I'm really glad that I'm here because I have 2 doctors and everything is safe in a clinical setting, this feels really good. Those people will be like, I can see myself doing this in nature. So like the study becomes like a gateway drug for people, but I think the most important thing we have to remember is that the research was here in the 60s. And when it got popular like in recreational use, when they took away our recreational use, they took away our research. So things like this, where we are educating the people who will be using these medicines, whether they're decriminalized, meaning you could get it, just grow it at home, or it's in a medical context and just gets out to the street. Like the best thing we could do is educate yourself, educate the people around you, and avoid the pitfalls of the past and learn from it. So that's, I think, whatever the research shows, it's going to be up to us to like bring this out in a responsible way.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to talk about kind of this dichotomy between FDA clinical trials and then what we're seeing get done at a city and state level. So, so far what we've talked about is, going through drug development for various indications, going through the proper federal pathways, but simultaneously what's occurring is that various cities and states are decriminalizing and even legalizing these compounds. So Oregon was the first state to create a legalized framework under Measure 109. And under Oregon's framework, you actually do not have to have a particular indication to access psilocybin. So in January of next year, they're going to start licensing companies that are able to legally, at least from a state perspective, deliver psilocybin therapy, not necessarily for an indication, for mind expansion, entheogenic, spiritual, whatever word you want to use that they're using it for. So I'm curious, with Julia and Michelle both being doctors, obviously the research is very important. We all understand that in the 60s and the 70s, some people use these compounds irresponsibly, which may have had something to do with them eventually being labeled as Schedule 1. And I think none of us want bad things to happen, because that could potentially kind of basically take us back several steps. So Julia and Michelle, maybe if you could just opine on how you feel about what's happening at a city and state level.
Yeah, so the idea of decriminalization, it's really, like the last few years, we started seeing these things pop up, like Colorado, some cities in Colorado decriminalized, and this was very exciting. And the cat's out of the bag. We know that like people are talking about this, and I'll say the same thing, like we need to educate people. Some of the people that are moving this forward, they understand the importance of educating the politicians, but we have to educate the people to say, like, here are the potential side effects, here are the potential risks, here are potential resources. There's an organization, they're called Fireside Project, and they have a number, I think it's 6-2 Fireside, yeah. And this is an organization, it was a nonprofit, that if you're tripping and you are freaking out, you call 6-2 Fireside, and there's someone there that will talk you down. Yeah, give it up for Fireside, unbelievable organization. They launched April of last year. They've seen thousands of people, and they have these metrics of how are they showing their success, and they're showing X number of people would have gone to the emergency room had they not had someone to talk to. Some like, how many of you have ever had a trip where you might have been able to use something like this? Yes. Yeah, definitely me. So, being able to avoid those news stories of, people going to the emergency room. The other thing is, you have somebody that's having in a city that's decriminalized, they're having a psychotic episode because they're on a drug. They come in to the emergency room, they get whatever the medication that they need to sedate them. So you've short-circuited the trip that you needed to probably go through a little bit more and integrate. You then maybe get a diagnosis of something, drug use, substance use disorder, or psychotic, episode, and now you're on medication, and you're on medication, you go to your doctor, they're not gonna take you off of it because there's this psychotic episode. So it just becomes this whole mess for the person that really was just trying to heal themselves in whatever way they saw fit in the moment. So the decriminalization part, the medicalization part, we need to educate doctors. Medical cannabis is available in Florida. If your doctor doesn't know about it, neither do you. So we have, there's gonna be room for everything. Personal use, medical use, we'll see new molecules come out. This is shorter acting for the people that don't wanna be there for 9 hours, or less hallucinogenic effect, and see how that works. And there's always gonna be room for both things. All of us need to be educated. Clearly I'm on the same thing.
So I'll just say that in just going forward with the decriminalization comment, that there's this concept of neuroplasticity, which basically means that our brain is flexible or plastic. We can adjust how we think, we can change our beliefs about ourselves. And so when people do psychedelics, let's say more for recreational purposes, it may just be a one-time thing. When we're dealing with chronic depression, anxiety, PTSD, chronic pain, it's not a one-time thing. That's called the afterglow effect. You feel great for a week or two, and that's actually what the ketamine studies show, that one session of ketamine gives you a max of 2 weeks of pain relief or any change in depression. So the concept is, and the FDA makes us go through the different phases for safety, efficacy, but also durability. Is this going to last a long time? We don't want to introduce a treatment and then they only get a short period of relief from it. So the concept of neuroplasticity is really important, the fact that we can change the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we feel, and that's why decriminalization is wonderful, but I still think that if people are really suffering, they're going to need multiple sessions, which is not going to be done in a recreational setting.
And just to comment on that concept of neuroplasticity, when you're really suffering from one of these very serious conditions like MDD, treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, addiction, you kind of have this constant loop of negative thoughts. Your brain becomes very rigid in the way it's thinking. And that's precisely what psychedelics are doing, is they're creating neuroplasticity, more malleability, so you can kind of break this way of thinking, this rigid way of thinking, and allow yourself to really process some of the trauma or whatever it is in a different way. So I have a lot more questions, but I want to make sure we get to Q&A because we got a lot of people here. I want to make sure you guys get your questions. But before we do, I'm going to ask each of the panelists if anyone wants to get in touch with you guys or learn more about what you're doing. Instagram, website, email, what do you guys got?
My Instagram and website is Dr. Michelle Weiner, and I have offices in Miami, Hollywood, and Boca.
You can find me on social media at Zappy Zappalin, and zappyzappalin.com is my website, and themindarmy.org is where you go to check out what the Mind Army is up to.
And you can find me on Instagram at reflective_mirror, spelled M-I-R-E-R, like my last name.
You can find me on Instagram, DustinR10. Also, if you're interested in getting involved in some of the advocacy work, MrPsychedelicLaw.com. Just click get involved when you go there. And also, if you're interested in learning more from an investment perspective, you can visit our website, EaterInvestments.com. So I'm going to open it up for questions. My man Sam Baum is going to be carrying around the mic, so just raise your hand if you have a question.
Right here. I'll try to work around as much as possible. Lots of hands.
So in the last part, you were talking about usage of being in a setting of having to do it over and over again. What about microdosing? And do you think that that would ever work with your kind of thing, where you have somebody you can talk to once a week and maybe you're using a small amount, or that kind of idea?
Sure. So So you could microdose anything. You can microdose cannabis. It doesn't have to be psychedelics. It just means pretty much 10 to 20% of a macro dose. Microdosing can't be done every day because you'll build tolerance and it won't have the same effect. There's two different ways between James Fadiman and Paul Stamets, and Julia knows much more about this, but usually it's once every third day or a few days on and a few days off. So microdosing you always would do with a specific intention also, and you would have a certain time in which you would microdose until. Microdosing can also be done for people who have trauma and are unable to speak about their trauma during therapy. Helps to kind of be like a lubricant for that. So you can microdose ketamine, you can microdose psilocybin, and my only thing is that you can't microdose forever. So you have to have a certain time in which you stop.
Let me just add to that I'm involved with a company called Psychedelic, and we're bringing technology, patented technology from the pharmaceutical space over to the psychedelic space, so we know it already works. And the idea is to be able to deliver a microdose without somebody having to take, like right now, if you wanted to microdose ketamine, you'd have to take a lozenge every hour, 2 hours, something like that. It's very difficult. And a lot of times when you're on ketamine, you forget you took the ketamine and you take another one, and then you go, wait a minute, did I take that? So what we're doing is to be able to deliver nano-based psychedelics, and to be able to take it once, it goes into your bloodstream, and each hour or 2 hours, whatever's programmed, a layer of polymer comes off and you get more medicine. So you can just take it once and get it throughout the day. And this is really promising. We have another one where you rub it on the topical on the back of the neck at the base of the hairline. You don't get the psychedelic effect. We're doing it with ketamine. We've already done hundreds of people. You don't get the psychedelic effect, but it goes directly into your nerve tissue right here, directly to the brain, avoids your whole systemic system, which is where all the side effects and things happen, nausea, dizziness. So we're finding that this is super effective, that people are getting that neurogenesis that Dustin referenced, that every time you do ketamine, when it metabolizes, it grows these new neural pathways in the brain. So I don't know that you can't do it forever. If you're talking about building your brain up and building new neural pathways, it may be something where, our brains aren't even set up to handle the level of technology and information that we're dealing with right now. And we need some of these tools like ketamine to accelerate our evolution right now.
Yeah, and just to add to what Zappy's saying, I think you could kind of hear that the answer for microdosing is that we don't know. A lot of the research that we were referencing before has been around macrodosing. So Imperial College of London, Johns Hopkins, Yale, NYU, top institutions have done tremendous research around macrodosing. And there's now companies being launched around this microdosing concept. I've personally microdosed. I believe in it from a mood enhancement perspective. Whether it could be efficacious for serious conditions like PTSD, MDD, TRD, all these other conditions, is questionable. I wait for the research to come out and then I make my decision. I will tell you, our investment fund has yet to invest in a microdosing company. That doesn't mean we won't, but we're watching the research. That's actually even more interesting. So we have invested in a company called Wisana, and their protocol is a macrodose of psilocybin followed by a regimen of microdosing, a combination of psilocybin and CBD. So one of the things you'll see in the research for Compass Pathway, which is the sponsor on the phase 2 clinical trials for psilocybin for MDD, is that there wasn't that much durability with it. So yes, there was these improvements, but the charts kind of go like this. So there was improvements in major depressive disorder, but it went down. So what Wisana is looking to do is increase that durability. Kind of like what Michelle referenced. Yeah, ketamine, you have this afterglow for a couple weeks. Well, maybe if you have kind of a microdosing regimen thereafter, you could kind of extend the benefits of what they do. Yep, thank you.
Hello. So my question was really around education, as far as like educating the public on this stuff. And so I guess my question is sort of two parts. One is being, when was that moment that you guys sort of had that initial turn? Like you mentioned it briefly, Doctor, you alluded to it, where initially you had that thought of like, on drugs, the frying egg, the glass of OJ, whatever, and then you had an experience that sort of changed. But what was that initial, education that changed your mind? I was really, I really resonated with Dr. Carl Hart's story. He's the head of psychology at Columbia. He talks about going into research. He's also from Miami. Shout out. He talked about going into the research to prove how harmful drugs were, and then in fact became, a user himself. He writes about it in his book, Drug Use for Adults. And so, yeah, I just wanted to hear about what was that moment for you guys, and then what do you think is, because I'm also very data-driven like you, Dustin, where for me it was initially, hearing about how non-harmful the cannabis was and how reefer madness was not quite as. So how do we fight back against a century of drug propaganda, essentially?
So the one thing is the experience is necessary to add emotional understanding to intellectual belief. So you can read it, thank you so much. You can read about it a lot, but it starts to make more sense once you've experienced it. The thing is that I actually started looking at the data afterwards. Because of the experience I had, I was like, oh my God, how are we not studying this? Granted, when I first experienced this, I thought I was a scientist again, and I'm like, I'm not gonna read a single book or article. I thought 2.5 grams was a microdose for a while. But then when I started going online, and it's like knowing what to search for. And then for anyone who here is psychedelic informed, just plant the seed with people, because the information is there, we're just not looking. And so you can't know what's gonna be important for somebody, if they need the data, if they need, personal experience, or the, particular condition that they themselves have. So just getting people curious, I think, is the way to go, because then they could find whatever is relevant enough for them to get involved, to try it, to share it with others, and so on.
Yeah, and I'll just say that for me, I actually never tried a psychedelic up until 3 years ago when I started getting involved in the industry. Yeah, people are pretty surprised. So, for those of you that have not tried a psychedelic compound, I understand where you're coming from. I carried that stigma. What really changed me was reading some of the research out of Johns Hopkins, Imperial College of London. I mean, you could read plenty of books, Paul, How to Change Your Mind. There's some really great books out there. But if you really want to understand what's going on, I mean, these research papers are very dense, and I, got super geeky for about 2 months reading it. But, that's really what is going to educate people and help them open up their mind. Another book that I actually just recently read was a book, Supernatural by Graham Hancock, and I never thought that I'd be saying this, but the book was about the concept of DMT allowing you to enter other dimensions and potentially communicate with other life forms. And these words would have never come out of my mouth 3 years ago. I would have been like, you're tripping too much. But he goes through some of the research done by Rick Strassman and some very strong stuff out of ancient civilization, and he basically has a very compelling case that potentially DMT could allow you to potentially enter into new dimensions. So there's a lot of good books out there. I think you all should very much educate yourself and learn about it. I know I've been on this educational journey for about 3 years, and it's been very exciting. Michelle?
So for me, it was easy because I was a pain doctor in South Florida, and everybody that I was seeing was asking for opioids, and I was not okay with that. So I started to use cannabis 6 years ago with those patients, and I did my own research, and there was a 40% reduction in opioid use when you started using cannabis. And there was also a 25% reduction in opioid overdose deaths in the states that have legal medical cannabis programs. So because I started with cannabis, it kind of led to ketamine and now other psychedelics, but the biggest problem is that they don't teach cannabis or the endocannabinoid system in medical school, and when they talk about ketamine, they're probably talking about it as an anesthetic. So it's really getting future physicians, medical students. I'm faculty at Nova and UM, and so I have students who rotate with me, residents. I have palliative care fellows who don't know anything, and it would be such a great tool for end-of-life care and distress. So I think it's really getting it into the medical field and educating them properly.
I just want to tell a quick anecdotal story just to give you guys a perspective that this is magical things. You know, this is like we are actually in a miracle, and we forget about it sometimes. We get used to this reality, and the psychedelics reconnect us back to that miracle. And I was sitting with a woman who was doing a ketamine treatment in the doctor's office, and I was meditating. It's 45 minutes. She asked me to sit there and meditate while she did her session. I sat there, I was doing it. It was a Friday afternoon, and I started to get hungry at the end of the session, and my stomach was growling. I started thinking about dinner, and I was like, I'm gonna go with my daughters. I'm not gonna get the French fries. I'm gonna get the baked potato. I'm going like through the whole menu and everything. And the lady comes out of the 45-minute thing, and she's like, wow, she pulls off her eye shade. She's like, that was amazing. She's like, I went from one dimension to the next dimension to the next dimension. She's like, all of a sudden this giant French fry showed up. She's like, what do you think that means? And I was like, oh my God, like you really got to protect what you're thinking about, because energy and frequency is real. And so we have to appreciate that we have the best product in the world. That's why it's so easy for us all to be doing what we're doing. And it will come out because we have the information, the research, and unfortunately we have a mental health crisis that's going to make it inevitable.
Yeah, that word you said at the end was literally what I was about to say. You guys think, to a certain extent, that it is inevitable that people catch on and it becomes.
That's why I'm so passionate about the research. You can't argue with that. You know, you can argue with anecdotes, but when you have FDA research and you have the FDA that has designated both MDMA and psilocybin as breakthrough therapies, and I believe they're going to do the same thing with DMT, 5-MeO, and some other psychedelic compounds very soon. So I think research, objective research, needs to come out, and after that, I think, you know, it will be indisputable that these compounds are safe and efficacious.
I wanted to also add, for anybody that is interested in getting involved in the research, so we have the Cannabis and Psychedelic Research Center. It's in Fort Lauderdale, and we have completed the psilocybin study, but we are enrolling for an LSD dose discovery study, meaning it's healthy people, probably some requirements about previous psychedelic use, so maybe for anybody you know in your family that's curious but wants to do it in a safe space. So we are enrolling, and if you have any questions, just reach out to me. And the other thing is, for microdosing, yes, there's not a lot of data. That takes a lot of money and time to research certain things. And so there's an organization, it's an app, Quantified Citizen, where they have gathered like 15,000 volunteers. They go through a kind of, they teach you how to blind yourself for the study, and meaning like that you don't know if you got the dose or not, and you're able to get kind of your own, capture your own data, where you're checking in like, here's how I feel, and you're also contributing to the greater scientific community. So it's Quantified Citizen, it's called the app is
Download it, for sure. Yeah. Download the app. We invested in Quantified Citizen. They're gathering tremendous data. Download that app.
Hi, my name's Hannah. So I just want to start off by saying I'm 100% on your side, and I'm totally an advocate for psychedelic medicine, and this is what I want to dedicate my life to. But I do kind of have like a devil's advocate kind of question, because I think it's important to ask these kinds of questions to people who are qualified to answer them. And so basically, from my rudimentary understanding, and I'm going to touch on antidepressant, treatment-resistant depression, and ketamine specifically, but from my understanding, antidepressants historically have been like based on the monoaminergic system, right? And so what was so revolutionary about ketamine and how it was treating depression was that it's a totally different system, the glutamatergic system. So I'm just curious on whether you believe that, or basically, do you think ketamine is the final frontier for antidepressant drug development, or should we focus on other aspects of the glutamatergic system, and maybe that could help create medicines that wouldn't be so stigmatized.
We do it, yeah. So that's why ketamine is indicated for treatment-resistant depression because it doesn't work on serotonin the way that classic psychedelics or other antidepressants like SSRIs, SNRIs do. So it works on the glutamate neurotransmitter or the NMDA receptor. And there's this process called central sensitization. And central sensitization is once you have some type of injury, trauma, insult, it could be pain that's physical or emotional, your body, if it's in this relatively helpless state, it starts this wind-up phenomenon, and it doesn't really quiet down. And that's what the research shows, is that this actually reverses central sensitization. So people who have chronic depression, and also there's another trial called the STAR-D trial, which is with antidepressants, showing how the more times you take antidepressants, by the third antidepressant, it's not likely to work. And so there's really like about 33% of a chance of it actually of being very effective. So besides it working on glutamate, there's also the experiential component. You know, the fact that when you're giving someone a psychedelic, you're having an experience, and then there's a concept of neuroplasticity. So it's not just the biological mechanism of glutamate, but it's also the insight gained, which is why you have to work with someone and actually discuss this and have multiple sessions. And then also the neuroplasticity from something called brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is like fertilizer for your brain, so it allows it to rewire in a certain way. So there's the concept is more not taking a pill every single day to numb your feelings, and instead prepare properly so that you can feel your feelings and then get off of your medications. So it's really, that's what we say is a paradigm shift.
And I'll add on to that, like ketamine, and Michelle was the one that said that I'm being forced to use ketamine for everything, even though maybe MDMA is better for PTSD, psilocybin's better for childhood trauma. So I think in the future, my opinion is that ketamine will have a very, very important role in the acute care situation, meaning EMS, emergency room, for suicide, because it will remove your suicidal thoughts within 45 minutes. Now, you have relief from your symptoms for 7 to 10 days, and I think the future will look like this. Okay, what got you here? You have a little relief. Now you could think clearly. Was it your couples problems? Here's an MDMA couples counselor. Is this your addiction? Here's an Ibogaine treatment center. So I think that it will be a great kind of initial step, but because of its less long-acting effects, it's really there just to give you a little bit of support, and then it's up to you to move forward in like the right way.
Great question, great answers. Anyone else have a question?
Over here.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for being here. It's amazing, your level of expertise that we get to interact with. Thank you so much. So these are great news for me, like I've been in this field, you know, like, I mean, not scientifically, I guess.
A lot of us have been in this field for a while.
And now we're hearing like really advanced, like very strong advances in all, you know, like freedom of, well, decriminalization is really like a very big topic, you know, it's like, it has, literally is international, right? So, what I was really interested in earlier, you mentioned that there was like a new kind of like, some like an opening of the law. I don't know how.
Yeah, Measure 109 in Oregon.
The one where you could actually run your own sessions for other people.
Yeah, so Oregon passed Measure 109 about a year ago. Measure 109 creates the first commercialized legal framework for psilocybin. It's kind of similar to cannabis, but the main difference is that cannabis legal framework includes retail stores where you pick up, and in most states you're required to consume cannabis in private, even though many of you are not consuming in private right now. That is illegal. But in the psilocybin framework, it's actually, rather than retail stores, it's service centers. So you basically will go to a location where it will be administered under a licensed facilitator. So in January of next year, they will be opening up applications to apply for a production license, a service center license, a facilitator license, and a third-party testing lab license.
Incredible.
And the bill that I filed, along with my team at my nonprofit, it is very similar to Oregon bill. We filed that bill in Florida last legislative session. Woo! And we actually got a lot of support.
These guys are doing the work, guys. Like,
what we need is more money, though. We need more money. So if anyone has any, if anyone has any rich friends that wants to donate to a nonprofit, a 501c4 for pushing this forward,
I have one more
please reach
question
out.
about, like, is there a central, like, nonprofit that all this information is, or that is promoting?
Well, my nonprofit is MrPsychedelicLaw.com. I know Julia works with some other nonprofits. Do you want to give some shout outs to some of those nonprofits?
But
Well, actually, let me tell you this. If you guys go, we launched our own website called Newly.com, NeulY.com. Recommend all of you guys check out Newly.com, set up a login account. It's the largest database of psychedelic information. You will be able to find every single nonprofit, every clinical trial, every clinic, every practitioner, every job posting, every company. So if you're interested in just information, NeulY.com.
Wow.
You need to go to at the bottom of it. We're redoing the website. You need to create a login. Once you access that data, you will be blown away.
Okay, so one last thing. So what's protecting all this data, though? You know, there's a lot of apps, there's a lot of organizations, and then we're turning in our data or our information to these organizations. So it's hard to tell which one to trust.
So our focus is the focus behind the holding company of Newly, which is called Nucleus, is the decentralization of patient mental health care. So what we want to do is we want to empower patients to take control of their own mental health, and by doing that is carrying their mental health records on the blockchain so that they could own their own mental health, because the reality is the best person to fix your mental health is yourself. So you really need to own that data. So that's actually precisely what we're working on.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Natalia, and I have a few questions. The first one, from the perspective of pharmaceutical field, you as a representative of psychedelic field, do you feel a pushback, or do you feel that pharmaceutical, the big pharma, right, stopping or preventing the research, everything, the spread of psychedelics? This is one. About the ketamine clinic, I guess you do the whole physical examinations to the patient history. I'm just wondering what will be the absolute or relative contraindications for the ketamine therapy. I know for the mushrooms, I know most likely cardiovascular, probably psychotic history, to not probably for sure. And the last question, why, for the people to participate, why do they have a certain number of the experiences, like you mentioned, 5 in the whole lifetime? And the most important thing, what is that, not grace period, but you mentioned like, I don't remember what you mentioned exactly, why I have, if I want to do mushrooms, right, in therapeutic setting, why do I have to wait, let's say, 5 years, or if I did mushrooms last year, why I cannot go and do it now?
I'll take the first question, and then I'll let the panel take the others. So the pharmaceutical industry. So right now, obviously Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, all these different big pharma companies that are valued in the hundreds of billions of dollars, they have their own SSRIs and benzos, so they have an incentive to block some of the psychedelic research. But what's exciting is that the cat's kind of out of the bag. And the research has already been proven. The FDA has actually already designated MDMA and psilocybin as breakthrough therapies, which means they're being fast-tracked. And so really what we're seeing the big pharma doing is kind of sitting back and watching these small startup biotech companies develop these new compounds. And what they will likely do is they will acquire whatever they like, whoever the winners are. They will write a $10, $15 billion check that's the MO for big pharma. But what's also exciting is that J&J actually came out with, Michelle referenced S-ketamine or Spravato. It's a ketamine nasal spray. So you do have J&J, which is a huge pharmaceutical company, actually doing, actually having a psychedelic medicine actually approved through Spravato and S-ketamine. And then recently, Otsuka just licensed out, which is another huge pharmaceutical company, just licensed out a family of new chemical entities that are psychedelic inspired from a company called Mindset. So what's exciting is now pharma is starting to get more involved in actually a very positive way, basically finding the stuff they like and acquiring those assets.
I'll take number 3. So we actually discussed this, and one of the things that I brought up is, when we asked people how many experiences that they had, that probably worked in the last couple of years, but as I said, we're running out of people. People hear about it, they go and they try it, and what we were talking about is shifting that criteria to be like, how many intentional psychedelic experiences have you had for therapeutic reasons? Because you can take the same amount and have 2 very, very different experiences. And so I think it doesn't make sense to rule out someone who tried this on their own and wasn't able to. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the goal was to make sure that we have people as naive to this as possible. We only had one participant who said, my doctor said to go into the study and then not read anything. And I heard about it last year and I haven't read anything. And was like, what? Other people are like, yeah, I signed up last week. I read everything the internet had to offer. So am I gonna have my life changed? And when you come in with that kind of expectation, 1, the placebo dose becomes absolutely devastating. And then 2, you might rob yourself of the healing that you were ready for because you're expecting some kind of big thing. So a lot of our conversations with people was expectation setting, making sure that even though they read about it, that's not necessarily for everyone. So they were trying to just do the best that they could.
The only absolute contraindication for ketamine is uncontrolled high blood pressure, and actually, on Thursday, I had a patient whose blood pressure was really high, and we just gave her clonidine sublingual before to lower it. The biggest side effects would be nausea, elevated blood pressure, and then anxiety. I never give someone a benzo during their infusion or intramuscular injection if they're having anxiety, because we want them to feel that. That's part of the experience. There's many ketamine clinics that they will just give you Ativan during your infusion if you start, showing them any signs of anxiety or hallucinating or anything like that. So that will completely blunt the ketamine and the experience, and really it's just monitoring blood pressure and then controlling nausea.
And if somebody asked, did I do a psychedelic before this panel? Yes. But I just want to add one more little bit. So I just want to give one
Let's all guide Zabby on his psychedelic journey.
I just want to talk about the importance of why we're doing what we're doing, and it has to do really with expanding consciousness with everyone, because we have so many big problems right now that if we try to focus on war or hunger or the environment and these things, it's, in my mind, a little bit of a waste of time. We have to get enough people to have a psychedelic experience, raise their consciousness, come out with more empathy, and then with raised empathy, we can figure out any problems that we have right now. It'd be easy. Thank you. The urgency is that Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, says that in 2045, when we reach singularity, where your brain is connected to the internet, right into your brain, and you have AI running calculations on that, that in 2045, the average human with that will be 1 billion times more intelligent than they are today. What that means is that anybody who has that setup is going to be able to destroy Miami, destroy the world, whatever they want to do, and we have to raise consciousness now so we can handle that level of technology and responsibility. We can't wait till 2044. So I think we all have to, again, get more radical. We're not going to do what the cannabis industry did and talk to the state and the local and the county. Like, we're done. We're going right to the DEA, we're going to the president who can write an executive order. We're saying, look at the most recent research, that's what we're asking, and we want regular rescheduling meetings. It's not a big deal. We expect to get it done in a very short amount of time.
Well, as you can see, many different routes and perspectives on ways to get there, but obviously all very good insights.
Hi, Jamie Renee Cruz. My question, I have personal experience with psilocybin as well as ketamine. I have CPTSD, some depression issues. I still have pain. Like my chronic pain is where I can't seem to escape. So my question is, while I've expanded my consciousness and I'm very evolved now, I still have pain. Is there a solution to take RFAs off the table for nerve treatment with ketamine regularly?
So I would say, you know, obviously chronic pain is chronic pain, but what is the source of your pain? So people have neuropathic pain, they have, you know, low back pain, some people have pain that really is more emotional pain that's kind of stored and stuck in the body. So my first question would be, is if you've done psilocybin and ketamine, was it with a therapist or a coach that could help prepare you and then discuss everything that you were involved with and then how to integrate that in your life? And my second thought is really to, you know, understand exactly the source of your pain. And that's sort of to your point about microdosing. Sometimes my chronic pain patients, after doing infusions of ketamine, we will continue them on an oral dose every few days of ketamine so that the medication stays in their body and they do have some pain relief in that way, and that extends it. And every person's different, and every, you know, one's trauma and physical pain is personalized. So we could also talk after about that.
Any questions from the back? Okay.
Thank you all so much. My name is Krum. I have a specific question. If you, in your preoperative evaluation, you decided that the patient will benefit from going to the K-hole from the large IV dose, let's say 50, 70 milligrams, what do you have this session go through with the anesthesiologist or a CRNA working under your license? And then for how many hours you have the psychotherapy session after the ketamine has worn out? And thank you again so much.
So the K-hole is really the transformative space. What used to be thought of as the K-hole is actually where a lot of insight is gained. And if you do it in a safe, you know, setting, then it doesn't really feel like the K-hole. It's actually where growth happens. So it doesn't matter your specialty. Any physician is able to use ketamine. Again, everything is done off-label. The most important thing is the route of administration. So if you're doing an infusion, then you need proper monitoring, you know, but at the same time, you still want to keep the setting so that the person doesn't feel like they're in like a hospital or such a clinical setting. So I have friends that are CRNAs that do ketamine infusions, anesthesiologists, pain doctors that do it, psychiatrists. It's really like the proper setup. There's certain things that you need, like AEDs, you know, like a crash cart, different things like that. But the safety about, the safe thing about ketamine is it doesn't affect respiratory suppression at all. It just elevates blood pressure, and it's really managing more of like psychological, you know, feelings that are coming up.
And so there, Michelle had mentioned earlier, there's psychedelic therapy and psycholytic therapy. So in psycholytic therapy, you do a lower dose, whether it's IV or intramuscular or oral dosing. You do a lower dose, and the idea is to lower your defenses so you can have a more honest conversation with your therapist, with yourself, and really process the things that might be coming up. It's a lot less psychedelic. When in our clinic, when we do the IV infusion, it is a psychedelic, it is a high dose, and we are realizing that, you know, in that moment, it may be beneficial to have someone in the room just to kind of feel that there's someone there, but the real opportunity to talk about things, it kind of comes within like a 36-hour window. Sometimes the day after, people can still feel a little groggy, you know, they feel better, but they're still, you know, processing. And so we encourage people to have a follow-up within a 48-hour period with their existing therapist, unless they need one, in which case we kind of arrange that. For us, we prepare them a little bit beforehand. We do a little bit of breath work before the infusion, and then after the infusion, we have one of our facilitators come in and sit with you and get some key takeaways. Because it's hard to kind of bring all of this stuff together at once, but if you can just remember one thing, if you can notice one change in your body after the session, then that's something that you can now work with for the next week until your next dose.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Give me one second.
While we're waiting, I just wanted to give a shout out to my mom.
The first time she's heard he's working with psychedelics, so that sounds bad.
Now she knows I've done psychedelics.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. Two questions. What role does music play in your practice? And is there any research that you're aware of how music can affect the psychedelic process?
So Julia introduced me to a company called Wave Pass, and he was actually he was like I think a fellow at Imperial College of London, and he says that music is the hidden therapist, and so the music is huge. When the patients like have their phones on with the notifications bothering them, like we make sure that all the notifications are off. Sometimes we'll supply them with our own playlists. Everybody's a little bit different in what they like, but we have a variety, and even if you go on Apple or on Apple Music or Spotify, you put in My Ketamine Home, KetaMD has one, Ketamine Music, there's tons of them. John Hopkins has one for their psilocybin study. So music is huge. Every time if you're taking a psychedelic, the music's very important, just so that you get deeper and deeper into it, and no distractions at all. But it's very important, the music that the person chooses, but we usually supply it for them or give them an option.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, when I did ibogaine myself to try it out, I wasn't addicted, but I just couldn't believe that there was some compound that in 12 hours could break a heroin addiction, and I just felt like I had to try it at the time, and it was an incredible, life-changing experience. But the Bwiti culture from West Africa that uses ibogaine in their ceremonies in order to get in touch with their ancestors, they have a very specific music, and at first you listen to it and it's super annoying and you want to smash the thing or and just end it, but eventually, like the shaman said, it becomes like your taxi cab bringing you back when you get too far out or you're down some pathway. The music's going to bring you back. So we use this it's on Spotify. It's called the Ketatation music. It's a ketamine enhanced meditation, and we use things like frequency music and singing bowls and things like that that are gonna take you along your journey, and it's being choreographed for a ketamine experience where at different points you're gonna wanna have different openings through the music for you. So I think it's a huge part of the experience, and I've done high dose mushrooms and things with no music and just blacked it out, and it was still incredibly powerful, but I do think that the music can be a guidepost for you during the session.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, there's been very little research on the experiential aspects of psychedelic medicine. Kind of when you think of like what Compass Pathway is doing, Usona is doing, they're not necessarily focused on music, art, dance, touch, visuals, things of that nature. But UCSF just actually opened up a new department specifically focused on that experiential aspect. So there now is some hopefully some really good research that will come in. And Wave Pass is doing incredible work as well. And I think they're actually partnering up with UCSF to do some work. But yeah, so hopefully we can get more research out on some of these experiential aspects, because I think art, music, all of these things could certainly be integrated into psychedelic assisted therapy.
Okay, I think actually we're going to do that as our last question. Couple of things that we like to do at the end of these.
One more question. One more.
Well, what we always try to do at the end of these panels is there's a lot of people who are here who are actually probably involved in psychedelics and mental health. So if you are involved in the industry in somehow and you are open to people asking questions and connecting, if you could raise your hand. As you can see, there's a lot of hands up. So hopefully you can see that what these panels have always been about for us is about raising awareness and building your community, getting education, helping fight a lot of disinformation that's been put out for decades and decades and decades. So you participating in this is a big part of that. And we also know that here at Space Park and 420 Yoga is an incredible community that is part of these things, whether we were here or not. So we really thank you for welcoming us into your community and your home here. Also, big thank you to all the panelists. Definitely please follow them, stay in touch with them. They're very, very smart. They're very, very open to answering questions off the clock. So definitely stay in touch. We do lots of panels. It's always, the updates on the monthly panels are Mr. Psychedelic Law on Instagram. And yes, thank everybody, the sound techs and Space Park who facilitated all of the things for the day. Thank you so much. Just one more announcement from 9,000 Suns about something that's going on. And again, thank you very much for participating today.
Please give them another round of applause. Give a round of applause for yourself. If you feel good, take a deep breath. I just want to sit here and I want to thank each and every one of you for using your platform for this positive, transformative healing that you are doing with your research. It's very essential during these times right now. So thank you, Julia. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, each and every one of these transformative beings. You guys